Hello, everyone. I'm Vivek Atray with another edition of Playwright Conversations. And with me is David Gower, former England captain. Welcome once again, David.
Glad to be back. Glad to be back. Lots to talk about.
Lots to talk about, David. And how's the Pakistan stint going with the commentary?
Well, yes, thanks for asking. I've been here for something like 10 days now. The PSL has got better and better. The runs have started to flow. There's been some great contests, some great sort of personal contests in amongst it. It's been very nice, very good actually to be back in the commentary box with an entertaining bunch of co-commentators. So I'm enjoying that. The one glitch we've had is a COVID test yesterday that proved positive on Fawad Ahmed, and I mean everyone's interested or concerned or somewhere in between to see what happens next. But we have a game scheduled or rescheduled from yesterday for this afternoon for later this evening, and that is, we're told, going to be 100% on. So if they're lucky, the whole thing will continue at the schedule pace, and therefore there's still quite a bit to go.
Yeah, very interesting and very sad that you got a COVID case. It seems the PSL is doing pretty well. In India, luckily, we haven't had any COVID cases in the Test series or before that. So seems okay. But the Test series itself has been pretty up and down. And the third Test, as you're aware, David, reached a kind of, it was a crescendo of sorts because it was over in 2 days. There was a lot of noise. Before that, it was 1-1. And now suddenly it's 2-1, and India has a chance of qualifying for the World Test Championship final if they either draw or win the fourth Test.
Mm-hmm.
So your comments on number 3, Test number 3 of this series, David?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a crescendo because everything happened at the same pace throughout the game, albeit it happened rather quickly, and it definitively happened too quickly. I mean, I know a lot of people have had a lot of things to say about everything to do with that third Test match. I just think it was a huge shame. Such a shame that you've got a magnificent stadium, looking brilliant, obviously, and you've got a perfect situation for 2 final Test matches in a series to be played out in the right way to decide things like, will India make it to the World Test Championship final, as they probably should. I mean, the first thing I'd say about that is that whatever happens in this series, whatever has happened in this series, I think the cricket they've played over the last year or two especially means they deserve to be there anyway. But all about the qualification, it does require them to either draw or win the final Test match. But the third Test match was a shambles. There aren't too many other ways of putting it. If you have all the things that happen in a Test match or happened in that Test match happening in 2 days, as they did, I don't think that's good. I mean, I know that. I mean, from what I read and what I heard, Indian fans were enjoying the fact that the game had been won by India, celebrating the streets after day 2. But what's wrong with celebrating after day 4 or 5? What's wrong with having a proper game on a pitch that starts well, deteriorates gradually, offers something to all sorts of, to all players? You had a day-night game, which was meant to be something for the seamers for once in India. Something for the seamers with a pink ball and a hard seam, lights on, evening conditions. Didn't matter. Obviously didn't matter. So I mean, there are only half a dozen people interested in that game, and they're all bowlers and all slow bowlers. And whatever people say about techniques, changing techniques, poor techniques, good, whatever people say about the technique of playing against spin, and there was a lot of hot air spoken about that. I'm afraid the contest was basically imbalanced. There's no way a Test pitch should behave like that from day one. Absolutely no way.
No, I agree with you, David. I think Test cricket is about attrition, about long innings, and about the bat and the ball having an equal chance. And maybe even the seamers in India sometimes pick up wickets. Even 1 or 2 would do, I guess. And it was a big ball test, as you said. But 2 questions I have for you on this. Firstly, do you think the ping ball is more difficult to play? Have you heard? I mean, obviously, you haven't played a ping ball Test match, but does it appear to you from the outside that it's a little more tough to bat with, even on a spinning pitch? And secondly, the technique of the British batsman versus the Indian batsman on what was a terrible pitch.
Okay, lots to talk about. As we said at the start, lots to talk about. Right, the pink
That's
ball.
right.
I mean, I've had to basically read what people have said about it, and the impression I got was that the way the pink ball is manufactured, there's more lacquer, and therefore it had a tendency to skid more when it hits the shiny sides. So obviously you've got the seam pretty much as normal. It'll grip on the seam as normal, but it'll skid more. So the ones that went straight on and were skidding tended to, apparently, if this is true, to do it slightly more quickly. Now, that's a side effect. I mean, obviously, people thought the pink ball would be something that the quicker bowlers could use when the lights came on. As I said just now, that was never going to be the case because spin was obviously the better option from pretty much ball one. So technique is interesting. All right, the technique argument is a difficult one because, right, England's batsmen have always had to adjust when they come to any of these subcontinental countries. That's almost a given. There have been times, of course, where subcontinental pitches have just been good. And if you come from abroad and you're playing spin, you get a chance to look at it because it's not doing that much. And if you're going back to the original premise, if you have a pitch which gives something maybe to seam bowlers at the start, gives something to the batsmen in the middle, gives something to the spinners at the end, that's pretty much the optimum dream pitch because it gives you a game of cricket with all the ranges. But in terms of playing spin, back to playing spin, there are things you can do and things you can't do. The one thing that people like me acknowledge straight away or have to acknowledge, if we choose to, is that playing spin now, because of DRS, is a very different thing to playing spin 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You can't kick it in the same way. You can't defend with a pad in the same way. People have to use their bat. Yes, there's an element of bat and pad at times, but it's a very, very different game. So in the last decade, batsmen have had to learn to basically play at the ball more, which is good. I mean, that is good for the game overall, I think, and good for a contest when the pitch isn't doing as much as this. But when the ball is both skidding on and turning quite sharply, right, some people said play for the one that skids on and you'll miss the one that turns sharply by 1.5 feet and you'll be fine. Well, that's okay until you get the one in between, which turns a little bit and pitches on leg and hits off, in which case you're still out. And you've covered the one that's going straight on, but you're still walking back to the pavilion because you're out. And people were talking about your technique then. I just think that, as I say, a lot of people are talking in all sorts of tones about techniques. But if you're talking about England batsmen having a struggle against spin, and it's high quality spin, I mean, Ashwin, we know, Ravi's been around for donkey's years. He is one of the world's best, if not the world's best in that department. He knows what he's doing, and he will slide it onto you. He will turn it to you. He will loop it. He will fire it. He's got all those varieties, which, for instance, Ollie Pope, who is short of confidence, obviously struggle with. And that happens to especially young players because this is a new situation, a new set of experiences, and you are, as the inexperienced man, coming up against a man with vast ability and vast experience. So they can make you look foolish under those circumstances. But whatever you say about England's batsmen on day one, and I think Michael Atherton very rightly said they should have made more than they did. Other good judges were nicely balanced, said yes, there were mistakes, and on day one they could still have made more. But when you see the second innings of the game, i.e. India's first innings, finishing, okay, with a lead that in the context of that game was big, percentage lead, which is quite high, But when the classic moment in that game for all of us, in many, many ways, was day two, start of play, Joe Root picks up 5 wickets for 8 runs in 3 heartbeats. Now, Joe is not a bad bowler, which is why he was able to include himself and exclude Don Best from the team that played the third test match. And he has picked up wickets against the best all around the world, but his bowling average was probably 40, for what I vaguely remember. And if he takes 5 for 8, that is a sign. That is a sign that things are happening that might not be expected to happen on the second morning of a test match anywhere in the world. And that, okay, if England's technique was wanting, what about the 5 men? Okay, I know they were down the bottom of the order. What about the 5 men? For instance, Ashwin's 100 in Chennai against the spin, made a mockery of some of the claims there that was a difficult pitch. Okay, that was a good example. What happens in Ahmedabad? Nothing. He becomes yet another of the victims. So I mean, I think that was kind of the litmus test for the conditions and techniques and all sorts. So if 5 Indian batsmen lose their wickets for no runs, I suspect there are other factors involved.
David, well said, well analyzed. I totally agree with you.
Mm.
I think the pitch should have lasted for 4 days at least,
Mm.
and the match
Yeah.
could last for 5 days. Why couldn't we have had double the number of runs, double the amount of entertainment, and people and no Root maybe claiming 5 wickets for 80 instead of 8? I mean, that
Well,
would have been a
yes. I
fair.
mean, okay. I mean,
That would
without
have been
being
okay.
too cynical, one understands that one can manipulate home advantage, especially if something like the World Test Championship final is part of the equation. As I say, I mean, there are two things. One is that I think India deserve to be there. Secondly, with even a sort of relatively normal pitch, who knows? They could have won the game anyway. I mean, obviously, this final Test match, we have something similar on the grounds that, it's not going to be. I mean, I cannot imagine it being an absolute shirt front of a pitch and 5 days of boring cricket leading to a draw to make sure that India gets the final. I'm pretty sure there'll be a result somehow. But if it happens in 2 days again, then I think the furore will indeed, you'll find your crescendo happens then, and the furore will gather momentum, and a lot more will be said, and someone, if there is an authority, if we still have authority in this game, that authority will have to get off its backside and do something about it.
Well said again. But the point is that what does England do for the fourth test? Now, if we look at the fourth test, I mean, England went with 3 seamers and plus Ben Stokes in the third one because of the pink ball, probably. Who do they drop now? Do they go in with 2 seamers and 3 spinners? Dom Bess comes back. Is that the scenario you're looking at? How does England approach this test?
Well, they have to approach it with a mindset that reflects the first Test match, which is tough, of course, because I know it's easy to talk about. You say, okay, right, what do you look for when you're starting a new game? Because every game starts afresh, and you try and reset to the last time you did well. So Joe Root's double 100 in Chennai in the first Test when he was in great form. If you can reset to something like that, I mean, obviously things like winning the toss inevitably will help, I suspect. But the harder part is for those that have had a really tough series all the way through. Because if you've been playing all 3 Test matches, or even 2 out of 3, and it hasn't gone your way, well, then mentally you are an individual in a team, and you can try and draw strength from a team, but you're an individual whose only memories of the last month are not particularly good. So that's a really tough thing to overcome. However strong you might be mentally, and however much you say to yourself, look, it's a new game. You can try new things, maybe. I don't know. It's a really tough thing for players who are not in form, because there's no time, no space to find it elsewhere. So you go from test to test, or Test match to practice nets to Test match, and that's it. What they could do is play an extra batsman and just say, right, we don't need the same hand of bowlers, because although I saw a picture of the pitch a couple of days ago, that is as meaningless as anything. That's as meaningless as invisible ink. It doesn't mean a thing. You can see, of course, there's going to be grass on a pitch in the preparation. It's really we all know. Everyone knows that it's what it looks like on the morning of the game that is much, much more important. And not only what it looks like, but what it's made of at the same time. So if it's going to crumble again, well, it's hardly worth watching. So what they could do is play the extra batsman, possibly just limit the bowling. I mean, Joe, whatever the pitch does, whether it does lots or not so much, might have to step in as the full-time spinner again, because they were just. I mean, if they're going to be short of runs, then maybe an extra batsman helps. It makes it harder work for the remaining bowlers. Yeah, and if you do have a longer game, then of course the number of overs they are all required to bowl goes up incrementally, and it becomes tough work. But Test matches are meant to be tough work. I don't know. Let's see what they do, but it could be the extra batsman possibly.
Yes, that's a good idea. But I want to tell you that 4 batsmen who are leading this run scoring chart at the moment are Joe Root, Rohit Sharma, Ravi Ashwin, and Virat Kohli. These are the top 4 run getters as of now. And Zach Crowley looked pretty good in his 50 in the first innings there. So what are these 5 people doing that is better than the rest of
them? You can either try and analyze it microscopically, or you just say they're good players. The one difference is this between, well, yes, you can use your feet, but if on an exploding pitch, you can use your feet at your own. You can, it can go wrong. Let's put it that way. It can go horribly wrong. It's a clever thing to do, yes, but let's face it. Okay, several things. One, Joe Root and Virat Kohli are in the top 4 batsmen in the world. By definition, they are exceptionally good players. Rohit Sharma is not far behind, and the innings he played, his 100 in Chennai's second Test match, was a great innings. It was a lovely innings to watch. It was very positive, as he is. He took it. Okay, it was first day. Doesn't take much away from it. It was a very, very good, very positive innings. And the exception to the rule, as it were, is that Ashwin, right, he's got, I think, 5 Test match hundreds, which proves that he's not a mug with the bat. But the difference in thinking is that when you're lower down the order and the situation allows you to take more risk, because if you're Virat Kohli or Joe Root, the risks you take have to be carefully thought through, and you have to say the percentages are in your favor. If you're Ashwin coming in at, say, number 7, and the situation is you've got runs on the board, you're going to be already possibly likely to win the game anyway, you're 90% certain to win the game anyway, then you're allowed to take risks that other people up the order are not. And it was a great innings in its own way, of its own kind. It was a great innings because it was played with great skill. The shots he played, especially as he got more comfortable and more settled, the shots he played were perfectly good, very good cricket shots. He picked the right ball to hit. He defended. It was a really good innings. But as I say, you are able in that situation mentally to say, you've got a little bit more leeway to take more risks. But it's actually, the irony is this, that as you get in more, then you start to feel more responsible. And if you look back at the way he got his 100, that was a risk taken. He got away with it. Yeah. So you always have this argument about, do you make your own luck? Well, up to a point, you do make your own luck, because the more you put pressure back on a bowling side, then when you've got spinners bowling at you who feel that they are expected to get you out because this pitch should be helping them, and you're smacking it over mid-wicket for 6, well, that is what's known as putting the pressure back on the bowler. So, and again, I refer back to Ahmedabad's Test number 3, and he didn't last 10 minutes to Joe Root. So there's the downside. There's the other side of it. So yes, it's I'm afraid a reflection of conditions overall, that some players will have not had time at the crease to find their form. And as we all know, confidence is key. If you know what you're doing, if you've had enough time out in the middle to build that confidence, and because the margins are so slim. Let's face it, the margins are so slim. If you get in and you just adjust everything so you're now perfectly in sync with the bowlers and the pitch, then the talent you have will allow you to get runs. If the dismissal comes too quickly, then you have nothing to work with. You have nothing in your mind that says, I'm getting this right. And all you have then are doubts. So your confidence is dented. You have these doubts, and all of us, whether you're playing cricket, tennis, golf, whatever it might be, the moment you have a doubt in your mind, things start to go wrong. Until you clear the doubt and clear the mind, and then focus entirely on what you know to be the right thing and do it, then it's always going to be a struggle. And that applies to batsmen primarily, but also to bowlers. Let's face it, if you're, one of the reasons Don Best, bless him, who's improved so much over the last 2 or 3 years as a bowler, wasn't playing in Ahmedabad in the third Test match, was because he'd lost confidence. The previous game, he had just lost what makes him good. And again, it doesn't have to be a disaster. It just has to be bad enough that your captain thinks, can't really bowl him now. So it'll be, if he comes back in, for instance, if for the sake of argument, he comes back in for this final test of the series, well, it's a man who will know that, he's got to conquer some mental demons if he's going to bowl at his best again.
It's very interesting that you talk of the mind, because you obviously played your cricket with pretty much a free mind until I think the West Indians were really, really tough. But I also want to say that, being a motivational speaker, I often mention that the mind is where the battle of life is fought. But I want to ask you the batsman's mind, the English batsman. So you've got Crawley, you've got Sibley, you've got Root, we've got Johnny Bairstow, we've got Ben Stokes. These people, who is going to come to unscathed from this series? So obviously, there's going to be psychological impacts on their minds and their careers?
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, you're right. You're right, and you understand these things. That the mind is a very important factor. I mean, I know from my own career, from, basically best part of 20 years of success and failure, inextricably intermingled. You always have that threat. You can be going well for 2 months, next 2 months can be horrible. You can go badly for a month, the next 3 months are great. Whatever it is, it's always up here that the big difference comes. Whatever you do technically, it's always the confidence and the mind that allows you to be free or allows you to be shackled. And all right, Root, we have no problems with Root and his reputation. In this winter so far in Sri Lanka and India, he has made a stack of runs. Hence, he's in that list of top run scorers. Someone like Stokes, who has a strong mind, will be disappointed at this stage with the way it's gone, and will hope that he either finds form or conditions or both that suit him, that help him maybe in this final Test match to finish on a better note. Someone like Sibley, he's very much a young batsman at the start of a career. He's done enough on tour to understand that it's tough, but to understand that there are ways of improving, which he's done. Crawley, I have a lot of faith in. I think he's a very strong character. He has a very good attitude to what he does as a batsman. And even if he has another bad game, or, you say the 50 in the first innings was lovely, duck in the second innings. That's what cricket does to you. Who knows what's going to happen in the fourth Test, but I think he has a mind that can cope with all this. He's got a technique that can certainly cope with all this. I think his future is bright. Whatever happens over the next few days, he will be playing Test cricket for England for quite some years. I mean, I was sympathetic to Johnny Bairstow because we mentioned this in one of our previous chats. Johnny looked good in Sri Lanka, having been called back into the Test team. He got runs, was in prime form, full of confidence. And what he would have loved, I am sure, even if he agreed publicly to go home as scheduled, what he would have loved is to come to India, play in Chennai, and start this series in good form. Instead, he misses 2 Test matches, goes away, comes back, and gets gets thrown into this. Gets thrown into a situation which is not unique, but it was probably as tough as it could be. And in those circumstances, you need that bit of luck to survive for 15, 20 minutes or more. And maybe you get into the rhythm that helps you deal with it. But if not, you end up with 0-0, and your mindset is completely different again. Completely different. Okay, I know Johnny, and he's outwardly a very positive person. However positive a mean you describe to others, inside, and we all know this, even the best in the world inside, if you've just got a pair, you're thinking, I don't want to get another one.
Right.
And there are positive ways of dealing with that. And there are, but you've really got to, get that little thought out of your head. You've got to drill in there, take it out, close the gap again, that it might not go well again. So, it's just such a different attitude.
What about the Indian players? I want to ask you about the middle order. I mean, Kohli, Rahane, and Pujara are all prolific players, and Kohli, of course, as you said, is one of the top 4. They haven't really fired. I mean, Kohli's got 2 half centuries, and Pujara hasn't fired. Maybe he's got a double century in Ahmedabad, I don't know. But Rahane also has got 160 odd. So even the Indian players are not playing spin as well as the players of yore used to play, perhaps. What do they need to do?
I mean, let's face it. I mean, this is one of the things that I suppose players of any era have to deal with. When things don't go as well as people expect, and that includes for the batsmen themselves, well, for everyone else, they start looking for reasons why it's going wrong. And you start comparing to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, which is, I won't say pointless, but it's not entirely relevant. And what you have to remember is that it's only weeks, that's all. It's only a few weeks since these same players were being lauded for beating Australia in Australia. Yeah. All right, very different conditions. Tough cricket of a very different kind. but it shows that they have heart, they have character, they have skill and determination. And I would suggest that if you want to look for a reason why the figures overall are not as high as people thought they might be, you can't just assume because someone is brought up in India and plays spin probably quite well that he will always get runs when the ball does more than normal. Because in very simple terms, some of these pitches have got old before their time. So whereas, and we've said it already half a dozen times in the last half hour, if a pitch progresses normally, the big turn comes at the end. Not on day one, not on day two, but 3, 4. Then you expect things to start happening. In that case, you've already got runs in the first innings, possibly. So your figures are okay. And you have that confidence you'll get from having made runs in the first innings. You can probably deal with it better when you come to your second innings and conditions are more testing. But if you're starting from scratch, maybe that's not the right word to use, who knows? But if you're starting with things up against you already, it's a different mindset. It's a different set of problems. So I think it's perfectly understandable that not just Pujara and Rahane and not just most of the England middle order, but a number of batsmen have found it not easy to score runs. If it's hard, it's hard. And when it's hard, you don't just get given runs. So, figures will suffer.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm going to now ask you about the missing piece. We've talked about Ashwin and Bess and Root in their bowling. We haven't talked about the two lefties, Axar and Jack Leach. So how do you compare the two of them?
Well, I mean, they're both, Axar obviously very young, having a great time, but he's had conditions in his favour. Jack Leach, I think, has bowled well. I think Jack, of course, who's been around a bit longer professionally, has really had to earn his place in the England team. The interesting thing for me is this, that whatever you've done before, and this can be the naivety of youth, which Axar Patel has. Okay, he's got IPL experience, but first couple of test matches, he'd have given anything to have pitches turning like that for him. He's bowled well, yeah. Jack Leach, the expectation maybe is that he does better or does more. One thing I'd say is I was thinking about this earlier. For Axar Patel, with this sort of astronomically great start to his test career, okay, gives you, again, this thing we've been talking about, confidence, for the next game, the game after that, the game after that. But what he will have to learn at some stage is that if he plays on a pitch, whether it be in India or more likely overseas, that doesn't give him extravagant turn for just doing what he does, which is, putting the ball on the length, and he's consistent, he's good, he's accurate. It doesn't give him the chance just to turn 1 3 feet and let the next one slide on and pick up wickets either way. And he's got to work for his wickets. That's when you'll find out how good Axar Patel is. And if I were him, I'd be thinking, yes, I'm very happy with the way things have gone so far. But at some stage, and I'm sure someone's told him this, he will have to earn his spurs, earn the right to be called a good, great, whatever word he deserves in the end, spinner, by performing on pitches that offer him less. Because, for instance, the man he's in effect replaced, Jadeja, had become one of those players who, yes, if it turns, you bring him on, he fires it in, and he's going to have you in trouble. But he had the knack of doing things on flat pitches. So, you'd be able to turn to him on day one, and it's 200 for 3, and say, right, give us something here. And he might just do something to get your wicket. And it's knowing that you can do that on good pitches that makes you a great spinner. Go back to Ashwin. Ashwin, who's got all that experience now on all sorts of different pitches all over the world, knows there will be days where it's not in his favour. So that's why bowlers develop different balls, different deliveries, new tricks to try and give them something back in their favour. And he knows what he's doing under those conditions. So, I mean, that's something that Axar will learn, I'm sure, in good time. But yes, you can take nothing away from his performances. They've been excellent. They've been match winning. He's got a bag full of wickets already in the space of 2 test matches, and good for him. I mean, that's what I do enjoy seeing young players come into Test cricket and both succeeding and enjoying it, especially enjoying it. I mean, I think that's important. But we all realise, and whether you're a batsman, bowler, whatever you might be, we all realize that even if things go well to start with, there will be, this is an unwritten law of the game. There will be times where it doesn't go your way. So you have to work hard, or even be dropped, maybe have to have a break at some stage. But, things will not always be so easy.
Very well said. There's a lot of philosophy in what you said, David, and that's very
Well, it has to be. I mean,
understandable.
Vivek, you know the game, you know philosophy, you know both. As a cricketer, you develop philosophy. I remember one of my colleagues in my first county dressing room at Leicestershire an awful long time ago, just saying very simply, enjoy the good days because there'll be a lot more bad days than good days. And that's a very simple way of looking at it. But you understand, and once you've played for a few years and you've seen the good days and seen the bad days and the ones in between, you know how true that is.
Yeah, one last quick question, David. This is about the quick bowlers and Ishant and Anderson, let's say, approaching the fourth test. I mean, Ishant got 1 wicket and 1 6 in his 100th test match. Anderson couldn't manage that, but he bowled very well earlier in the series. How are they going to approach this? I mean, it's just like maybe I get 1 wicket in this test match going forward. Is that how they approach it?
Well, I mean, I find it so frustrating because you want to see everyone involved in the game, and if conditions dictate that, some very fine bowlers, Anderson, one of the best ever in the history of the game, Ishant, who has been a faithful servant and a very fine bowler, Broad, an excellent bowler. If they're going to be taken out of a game of cricket, then it's like cutting a limb off. It's not the whole thing. It's not you haven't got a whole fit game of cricket to watch. Okay. I mean, I can't tell you what the pitch is going to do when they start this next game. Whether some efforts have been made to make it a better pitch or not. If it is, well, they might come into play. If it isn't, well, they won't come into play. So they'll just take their match fee, swing the bat at the end for a couple, and they'll hand the responsibility of winning the game over to the top order batsmen and the spinners, and you can have 8 aside. End of story.
Thank you, David. As always, very balanced in your viewpoints. And just like you used to be at the crease, lovely, wonderful flowing cover drives and pulls and hooks. But here, I mean, it's great to hear your views. I think very balanced, very, very objective. And I totally agree with everything you said. So let's see how the fourth test goes. And we'll be back with a review of the series. Do well in Pakistan and enjoy yourself.
Well, we'll look forward to it. As I say, fingers crossed we have a better game all round, a proper game of cricket in the fourth test.
Thank you very much, David. Lovely to see you again.
Pleasure. See you next time. Okay.